Welcome everyone to the Gospel Discipleship webinars.
I am excited to see you. My name is Michelle Morris, and I am the author of Gospel Discipleship. I have been praying for all of you as you've registered. I'm excited to share this process with you, knowing that the word process works really well for some of y'all and not for others, and that's part of what we're going to be studying over the course of the 6 weeks here. I want to introduce the folks that are on the panel tonight. I'm, as I mentioned, the author. We also have, because I like to make things as confusing as possible whenever we're first starting out, I've invited Michelle Moore to be with us, not to be confused with Michelle Morris, although we are confused with each other all the time, right?
Like all the time.
This is what happens when we're both working for the Methodist Church in Arkansas. We get each other's emails all the time. Michelle has worked for a long time with youth. How many years have you been in youth ministry, Michelle?
18.
Okay, yeah, so seasoned pro. And she also is in charge of Culture of Call for our conference. So she works with folks that are exploring a call to ministry, and we're grateful for that work. And it works really well because she can nurture them in the youth world and then bring them into ministry. So she's going to share a little bit later about what this process has meant for her. And then we have Asha Hickey Hughes, who is my marketing manager at Abingdon Press. She is going to be roughly y'all's voice through here. She's going to keep an eye on the chat and ask some questions on your behalf. And so, Asha, we're glad to have you with us.
Thank you.
Yeah, and then the gentleman you can't see because he is behind the scenes and critical is Jacob Turner, and I said I would introduce him as both tech support and moral support. So he is also keeping an eye on from a technical end, and I'm grateful for the work that he's doing.
I'm the perennial man behind the curtain.
Absolutely. So I'm going to share my screen and share a little bit of information with y'all. Those are the book covers for those of you that have seen them. We're going to talk, just to give everybody a frame for how these webinars are going to unfold. Today we're going to talk an introduction of gospel discipleship, so you'll have an understanding of what all is involved here. Then next week we will talk specifically about markings. You're going to learn that each of the 4 gospels give rise to 4 different understandings of discipleship, and so we'll go through those week by week. We'll start with the markings, and I'll explain why we start with Mark next week, so stay tuned for that. Then we'll have the Mattheans on the 20th of May, the Lucans on the 27th, and the Johannines on the 3rd of June. And the panels that will be involved in that will be folks that have, some of them that took the test quite a while back and have been living with this understanding of their discipleship now for several months, and then some new folks as well. So it should be a lot of fun to see how they understand their discipleship as a result. And then the last one that we will do is, once you have come to this understanding, and maybe you test your entire church, then what does it mean as a church to understand your discipleship this way? So we'll talk through what difference that makes for you all collectively together. And then there are a couple other things that I want to point out to you at the website, gospeldiscipleship.net, which I'll throw that up in just a minute here. There are some links that have been set up. One is a link to click to join these webinars, and we are still taking folks. They can join us in the weeks to come, so please invite your friends to be with us. Also, there's the link to take the Gospel Discipleship Assessment, which is where you find out what type you are. I hope that you all have taken that already, but if not, then you can go there and take it and find out before next week, so you know what your type is. And then there's a link to get some discounted books from Cokesbury. And it is a major discount. It's actually, in all honesty, you can get them less than I pay as an author right now. So go out and take advantage of this discount. And I thank Asha for setting that up for us. Also, I want to tell you, I mentioned that we have these panels. And what I would love is for some of you all to be on the panels that are coming up for each of the types. So if you are interested in joining us as one of the panelists, then go to my website and put your application in, and I'll be looking for a Markin, a Matthean, a Lucan, and a Johannine to join us. So I would love to get to actually see your faces. So if you're interested in doing that, go and fill that out. You just have to, we will do a kind of pre-interview, and you obviously have to be willing to be seen, maybe not in your pajamas that week, right? But I would love to have you all join me. Well, not all of you, but some of you to join on the panels as well. The other thing that we want to sort of reward you and encourage you for being part of these webinars is when you attend, we will get a list of who all has been here. And each time that you attend, we will put your name in a drawing. At the end of the last webinar, so at the end of the 6 weeks, we will draw 2 names. And those 2 people will each get 12 participant guides and 1 congregation guide. And I will say you can only win once. So if we happen to accidentally draw your name both times, we'll put your name, we'll draw a different name for the second one. So you can't win 12 books, 12 of the participant guides and 2 of the congregation guides. But hopefully that encourages you. I know there will be some weeks that maybe you can't make it to 1 or 2 of them, but the more that you can make, the more chances you have to get those books. I will take this moment to talk a little bit about the difference between the participant guide and the congregation guide. The participant guide talks about each of the types in depth and kind of talks in terms of personal discipleship. The congregation guide can be used as a leader's guide if you want to do this as a small group study, but it is also meant for leaders who want to take their whole church through this process or take a larger group through this process. It's a resource to gather for that. So probably need more of the participant guides than you will need of the congregation guide, which is why we do the 12 and 1. And that's also, it's 12 and 1 in honor of Jesus and the disciples too. So anyway, look forward to that at the end. And like I mentioned, be sure and invite folks to join us for the weeks ahead as well. And that's the website. And Jacob, I noticed, typed it in to the chat as well. So that's the website that you want to go to. And then Asha also has a whole page on Gospel Discipleship through Abingdon. So you can search Abingdon Press and find information about them there as well. Now I just want to talk through to introduce myself and Gospel Discipleship, which is what we're here for tonight, right? First of all, I am going to give a little bit of background on myself. This is, some of you may care, some of you may not. Actually, knowing the types, I can guess who cares and who doesn't, and you'll get a sense of that too. But I am a pastor and an author, and I've been a professor. I was a professional student, as we might say. I was a student for 33 years of my life, which I like to say I was in school as long as Jesus walked the earth. I have a bachelor's degree from the University of Arkansas in English and French, a master's degree in comparative literature also from the University of Arkansas. Then I have a Master of Divinity from Perkins School of Theology at Southern Methodist University in Dallas. And I also have a PhD in religious studies with an emphasis in New Testament, also from Southern Methodist University in Dallas. Outside of the 2 books, the other main things that you might know me for writing from is I was one of the writers for the CEB Women's Bible. I did the notes for 1st and 2nd Timothy and Titus. And then some of you who are Methodists may know me from the adult Bible studies. I've written the student curriculum twice. I'm in the process of writing the one for summer of 2021 now. Love writing for the curriculum, love interacting with you all there. I'm also didn't grow up in the church. I was baptized when I was 25, got my call to ministry at age 27. I like to say that God let me poke around for a while, and then when I was done poking around, we were moving. So, but I did have a kind of dramatic encounter at age 13 at a youth lock-in, Michelle, actually. not necessarily a positive one.
There's a lot of dramatic things that happen at lock-ins,
Yeah.
but that's a whole other story.
Right. But actually, it was a situation where someone was using fear tactics, and it actually drove me to read the Bible for myself. So starting at age 13, I started reading a chapter a day of the Bible. And then on Sundays I read 2. That was my going to church. And that ultimately led to me being in love with God and in love with the Bible, and still not sure about the church. It did take me a little while to get around to feeling more comfortable in the church. Like I said, I wasn't baptized until I was 25. But since then, I have been just passionate about bringing God's word to people and bringing it to them in a meaningful way. And hopefully that is seen through these books here. I welcome you to ask any questions about me if you want to. I'm married. I have a 17-year-old. We've had the adventure of homeschooling and all that fun stuff, like many of you probably do. And I do work in the conference offices, which I'm going to share, the Arkansas conference offices of the Methodist Church. And that gets us to the story of background on gospel discipleship, which is really what I want to talk about tonight. I just wanted you to have a little bit of background to me so you'd have a sense of how I got to this place. I was hired a couple of years ago to work as the lead equipper for the Center for Vitality in the Arkansas Conference. And we were in the process of really launching a push in Arkansas to look into and helping churches develop an intentional discipleship system, basically a way of having a plan for our discipleship. So I was hired for that work right as we actually kicked off Growing Disciples Summit, where we brought in speakers to talk about intentional discipleship. Our annual conference meeting that summer had intentional discipleship was at one of the speakers' main foci. We really were in this full emphasis to getting churches to put that sort of system in place. And it's a good idea, because not only does it keep us from being, sort of getting stuck in a rut in our own discipleship, but it also gives us a way to talk about discipleship with people that don't know Jesus. We can, if we can give them something to say, this is how we understand discipleship, it makes it that much more clear for them, and gives them a means to kind of connect more meaningfully. So I was charged with being the person who helped churches come up with this. And honestly, I wasn't very good at my job. I was doing quite a bit of research. There were some wonderful resources. One of them that I will point you to is a book by Ken Willard called Stride. It's very good at explaining why intentional discipleship is important and getting you to sort of think through that piece of it. So I point folks to that direction, to Ken's book. It's a good overall understanding of intentional discipleship. We also handed these out at annual conference, which is Developing an Intentional Discipleship System, a Guide for Congregations. This is produced by the United Methodist Church. And actually, if you go to Discipleship Ministries of the United Methodist Church, this book is available as a free download PDF. And it does the same thing. It gives a good overall understanding of why we need intentional discipleship. And so I was grateful for that. But what I was struggling with was I could get the why, right? First of all, we all have the same why for discipleship, which is we are called by Jesus to make disciples of Jesus. It's our purpose. It's why we exist. We have that encounter. We have that understanding, and we realize who Jesus is and what Jesus does for us and how he transforms our life. And we're called to then share that with others and bring others to that understanding and that transformation as well. That's our overall why. And I understood the why of intentional discipleship, as I mentioned. I understood that it not only helps us stay fresh in our own discipleship, but it also gives us a way to talk to other people about discipleship and sort of lay it out and make it clear. Back when everyone was in church and everyone was a disciple of Jesus, that was one thing. But I mean, we just did a webinar for our conference and pointed out that just in Arkansas, 25% of the people have no religious affiliation whatsoever. So we cannot take for granted that people have an understanding. And in fact, a couple of years ago, I had an encounter with a young man who was 35, and he never had heard the Christmas story. And that was indicative to me that people, we can't take for granted that people know what it means to follow Jesus anymore. So I knew that why was important. What I was struggling with, and what I found was problematic when I was working with churches, was that we could all get the why. The how piece was a real struggle for us. And it seemed to me that the how was made up of two things. It was made up of kind of where and when you are. So what's your mission field? You know, who's around you? What's happening in this context? That's a piece of the how. But the other piece of the how, and this was the piece I couldn't get a handle on, was the who. Who are we? And I found so many churches really struggling with that who question. So as I was trying to figure this out, I was meeting with Bishop Gary Muller. He's our bishop here, and he is the one who had put me in charge of working on intentional discipleship. So he had meetings with me a fair amount. And he thinks in bishop terms, which I appreciate, right? You want a bishop to think in bishop terms. So he was thinking broadly about the state. And he said, what you need to do is just come up with a process and give that process to the churches and let them put that in place, and then they'll have their intentional discipleship system. And I said, no. And the reason that I said no was because I was brought to the conference offices from a 2-point charge. Anybody else out there in a 2-point charge? If you are, I would love 2 or 3-point or 4-point charge. Share in the chat. I would love to hear that. But I came from a 2-point charge, and this is what I said. I said, Bishop, those two churches are 2.5 miles apart from each other. They are made up of the same demographics of people. They were formed within 1 year of each other, and I could not do the same thing at both churches. So what I didn't want to hand to people was a process that was going to work for some and frustrate others. I had been on the receiving end of too many frustrating programs, too many this is going to save your church, good ideas that didn't translate to my people because that wasn't asking the who question. And that was what was holding me up. And so while I was wrestling with that, because the bishop did say, he agreed that it would be great to contextualize, but he said, you can't go to all 650 churches. I said, that's a good point. I would like to see my family. I would like to eat and sleep. But you know, I still felt like there was a way to figure the who piece out. So I was working with about 20 churches, and some of those folks are with us tonight. I was working with 20 churches on developing an intentional discipleship system. I was doing the contextual work with them, but I was also studying the last words Jesus speaks in each of the Gospels. And the reason that I was doing that is because I felt like the last things Jesus said to us before he ascended were probably very important instructions for us going forward. And that would point us into how we would live our discipleship out. What was striking to me, and I knew this, but to sit and study it was really a powerful experience. All 4 Gospels end differently. They have different last words. And that's striking because you would think the last things that Jesus says before he ascends to heaven, everyone would agree on, right? Like that would be such a dramatic moment that we would all know exactly what was said. And yet all 4 Gospels tell different last words. And so I was reflecting on that. And as I was, it reminded me why we have 4 different Gospels. We have 4 different Gospels because they were written to 4 different communities. They were written by 4 different authors. They were written in 4 different times and places. And why would I assume that then they would speak the same way to everyone after that? Of course, we have 4 Gospels because we have different people and different contexts and different ways of understanding the world. And so those 4 Gospels are going to speak to so many people. They're going to resonate differently. One gospel is really going to take hold with me versus somebody else will really love this gospel. But at least there's 4 ways of telling the story. And if there's 4 ways of telling the story, there's that many more ways of reaching people for Jesus. And I had this revelation that not only was that important, but there are probably at least 4 different ways of understanding discipleship. And the 4 Gospels point to that. And it turns out the 4 last words spell out those paths. So I'm going to share that in just a second. But Jacob, this is when I would say we want to share this poll. So I have a poll for you all. Going to ask you guys. I hope some of you have taken the. In fact, I know from the emails that some of you have already taken the Gospel Discipleship Assessment. So Jacob's going to share a poll that's going to ask what your types are. And so if we'll just take a moment here, and if you'll vote, and you can choose more than one if you had a tie, because some people have a tie. But yeah, if you'll just choose, and I do want your primary type, not your secondary type. And if you haven't taken it, there's options down at the bottom. And if you took it, you may notice that one of the selections was, I took it, I haven't gotten my results yet. Check your spam folder. We had trouble. Actually, our conference had a block on it. Nobody could get their results for a little while. We got that fixed. But yeah, check your spam folder. It's very possibly in there. So.
All right, I'm gonna close it. We had 90% of people vote, and as someone made the comment they like hearing my radio voice, I'm going to end the polling now, and I will share results.
Okay. All right. So Markins have the barely edge there. Lukens, a good number. Mattheans, right behind that. Johannon's right behind that. Over the course of the weeks, you will understand why these numbers are the way they are. But yeah, okay, wonderful. So those of you, 19% of you that haven't taken the test yet, please take before next week so you can find out what your type is. And if you haven't, if you forgot your type, I encourage you just go take it again. Very briefly, I'm going to go through the types, but I'm not going to go deeply into those because we will spend the next 4 weeks doing that. But just want to share with you roughly what they are so you have a kind of sense. So Mark ends with Jesus saying you're going to grab up snakes, you're going to drink poison, you're going to cast out demons, you're going to heal folks all in my name. So Markins are Holy Spirit driven disciples, Holy Spirit inspired. They really are out of the box folks. And so we will, like I said, we'll unpack more of the characteristics over the next few weeks. Matthew ends with the Great Commission. Jesus says, go, make disciples, baptize, teach. It reads like a to-do list, and it's a series of actions. And so Mattheans are action-driven disciples. They like to put their faith in action. They believe faith without works is dead. So these are our go-getter kind of folks in that sense. Then Luke, we actually go into Acts for the end of Luke because Luke and Acts were written by the same person. And so to get to Jesus's ascension, we go to Acts. And there's a debate between the disciples about when Jesus is going to come back. And Jesus says, I don't want you to worry about that right now. Instead, I need you to start here in Jerusalem, basically with the people you know. Go out to Judea and Samaria, the people you kind of know, and then go to the ends of the earth, the people you don't know yet. And people tend to go out in Luke and Acts both in pairs. They tend to go with the instructions to stay, get to know some folks, heal some folks, live in their house, and then after you've been there for a while, start talking about Jesus. And so Lucans tend to be relationship-focused disciples. They build everything around love of God and love of neighbor, and that's really at the heart of who they are. And then John ends with Jesus and Peter on the lakeshore. Jesus says, Peter, this is what I need you to do. Peter says, what about that guy over there? Jesus says, I'm not talking about that guy right now. I'm talking about you. This is what I need you to do. I need you to follow me. And if you think about it, the Gospel of John has a ton of one-on-one encounters with Jesus, where Jesus is meeting that person where they are and getting them to the next step. And so Johannines tend to be folks that thrive through mentor, apprentice, nurtured discipleship. So that's kind of overall of how this works. I actually want to invite Michelle now to share a little bit from her perspective. So this Michelle is turning it over to that Michelle. And Michelle, I would say I would like to start with, what Michelle Moore was one of the first people that took the assessment way back about a year and a half ago. And she came out as someone who almost tied. It's the test is 22 questions long. So she had a 6 and a 6 and a 5 and a 5 score. So she's pretty even across the board. But I would invite you, Michelle, to share a little bit about how did it help you understand your discipleship to have this understanding?
For me, it explained the good and the bad, I think, that I've had and that I've struggled with over the course of my life. I grew up as a United Methodist, and I was called to youth ministry when I was 16, and I've had these very clear moments of faith formation. But part of the struggle that I had, especially when I was a teenager in the church, was I felt like people really latched on to pieces, and I latched on, but then I also wanted to do all these other pieces, and like I needed everything to make sense together. And so, we would go on a mission trip and people were all in for this action-driven piece, and I was still back in the back going, but what happens when we leave? Like, what do we do? Like, there's bigger pieces to this. And that I got frustrated because I kept thinking, like, I'm not doing this right. Like, I'm not all in for anything. I'm so spread out that I felt like I wasn't concentrating, my faith anywhere. And so I'm also, I'm very type A, perfectionist. And so I had this drive of, and I think some of why I was called into ministry is this exploration of, well, then how do I get there? Like, let me explain it to myself. If I can't, if I'm not doing it perfectly like I think I should, then I'm going to go study everything I can, and I'm going to go do it, in action to make it happen. And then I've lived into this well, and I think that some of the good pieces that have come out is that I relate to all of the areas and those interests and the types of discipleships that people are drawn to. And so I think that part of the reason that I've felt like I've been successful in ministry in different settings, whether it's a small local church, a very large local church, or kind of somewhere in between, and then into conference ministry, working more with youth workers instead of youth directly. I think it's because I can adapt all of those different pieces and I can pull from all of those areas. And then when I took the test and Michelle sat and explained all this, it was that mind blown, like, oh my gosh, this makes so much sense. This is why it just all clicked. And so now it's kind of led into, I can recognize why I'm drawn to particular things, especially now that since I'm on conference staff, I go to a local church as a congregation member and not as a staff member, and I can feel myself being drawn to particular areas, particular classes, particular parts of our Sunday school class because of the pieces, and I can see those at work, and it helps me. I have to be really good about it. But there's a part of me that also wants to keep all those pieces in check so that one isn't just doing all the action stuff and I'm not doing the other pieces. And so there's some accountability there to where I personally recognize that I don't want to go back to where when I was a teenager, I felt frustrated because I didn't feel like I was doing all of those pieces. And it's because I have that desire, all the way around. It put it all into words that made sense. That wasn't just a confused perfectionist teenager all over the place.
Right. Yeah. Just to share a little bit. So I meant to do full disclosure. I'm Markin Johannine. So you're going to see that. And they're pretty even on me. I'm slightly more Markin than I am Johannine, but pretty close. What was relieving for me is that I've never done a mission trip. Here I am, a pastor. By the way, Michelle is a layperson. She does significant ministry as a layperson and has always felt that call. And I'm grateful to all the lay people that have joined us as well, and for the ministry that you're doing in your workplaces and all of that. And hopefully, as you understand your discipleship, it will help you live your discipleship out in those fields as well. But I've never done a mission trip, and I felt so guilty about that. Like, I'm a terrible disciple because I've never done a mission trip. Mission trips were great for Mattheans. And I have almost no Matthean in me whatsoever. So I was like, oh, it's okay. I mean, I still should do a mission trip at some point to have that experience and to be present with my Mattheans and all of that. But it's not really my call as a disciple. My call is to live it out differently. And so I'm grateful that you've been given the same freedom of, it's all right that I'm a little bit like all over the place here. And
when I was in a local church I now can think that the congregation that I was working with, I think many of them are very Matthean, and they are very service driven and had this mentality of, if the youth are not doing something, they are not going to learn about God. They are not going to get the full effect. And I came in with this, but look, some of them don't want to build wheelchair ramps. Like, this is not going to help them find Jesus. And in fact, it's going to make them so mad, they're not going to, they're going to push back the other way. And so I kept saying, we'll do one thing that is labor driven, and then we're going to do something that is service driven, that is different. And you don't have to sweat through the whole thing and still be in that engagement. And so, and it took a long time, but this piece, which I didn't know all this when I was there, but it makes so much more sense as to why we had so much headbutting, because it wasn't just about the sacred cow of this is what we always do. It was truly about, this is my theology, and I want to make sure that my theology works, and that's what I think has to happen. And so it would have given me way better ways to have those conversations. but yeah, I mean, I think that's a huge piece of that, is that I walked in going, oh, there's a bigger picture piece here. But it makes sense too as to why we put down kind of our feet and say, no, this is our boundary, because that's what we know.
Right, exactly. So you alluded to a little bit how much it would have helped you to have this understanding in youth ministry. And I think we've talked before about how it would have helped to understand your youth in these terms, like who among your youth is really going to resonate with small groups because they're relationship focused, and who really wants to put their feet on the ground and do some work. So share with me some of the other ways that you think that this could have applicability.
So I completely, I see this being used in so many ways. One, I think for youth workers to understand who their youth are, and in the same manner of knowing what they're going to be drawn to and knowing what you can use is kind of the carrot almost for some of our stuff, but then also a way to kind of say, okay, these are going to be the ones that I'm going to slowly have to introduce these other kind of, the other pieces, some of it. And a lot of times, youth seem like they're mission driven because it's action oriented. But when you ask a particular question to youth about what they enjoyed about a mission trip, some of them will say, oh, I just enjoyed talking to the person we were working with. I wanted that connection. I wanted the relationship. And so what we have interpreted for so long as, well, my kids just really like mission trips because they come back talking about how great it was. If you don't ask the particular question about what was so great, you still think that they're Matthean because it was an action-oriented trip. And what really is, I took kids that were Lucan and they just loved to be loving on people, And so I think there's those pieces, is to be very aware of who you're working with. One, to know what they're going to be drawn to, but two, to know what you're going to have to challenge them with and make sure that they're exposed to. The other element is it would have helped me so much to know what my volunteers and my youth parents were, because one, I think there's some accountability to making sure that I provide volunteers that are going to interact and build relationships with youth that are not what I am. And so that I'm not just staying in my comfort zone. And so, I've always said I'm not a game person, and I'm the youth director that could not stand any games. I think like silliness is not, I was a 40-year-old woman at 12. And so it just did not, that it doesn't compute. And so instead of me saying like, we're just not a game, group, we're just not going to do that, I just found somebody that really likes games and said, please go do this. And so I think it's along those same lines of being engaged with volunteers who, and knowing where they come from, so that you can say, okay, I'm going to be really strong and always being mindful of this, this, and this, because this is what I love. And this is what I think, is first and foremost in my mind. But we're going to put this person and this person on the youth council or the advisory council, or we're going to make sure that they are a part of this, the volunteer group, so that my kids can build different relationships with different people. Your Lucan people are the people you need to go find for leading these small groups. Because if you're going and asking all these people who do not want to have anything to do with these deep conversations and building these relationships, that's where you're getting no's. There's just so much to that could just ease the stress that comes with building those teams of people. And I would love to get to where the requirement would be that your youth team, your youth volunteer team, has to be made up of at least one of every, gospel disciple, because I think that would give a lot better of this well-rounded discipleship piece as youth are forming that kind of understanding of who they are and what does make them work with all of that, and what is attractive, and how are they learning. And so if we give them those opportunities early on, and we expose lots of different ways to do this, then you don't have those young adults and going, oh, I didn't even know that you could do this. And if they didn't ever get exposed to that, and we don't give them that chance as a young adult, we know that they're just leaving, and they're going to go find it in a different way that doesn't, it fills them, but it doesn't necessarily compute to going to church. So that's a huge piece of it. I also would love to see this, and I know we have lots of denominations. So for the UMC, to me, it would translate into the cabinet to understand where clergy fall versus where churches fall, and where the conflicts, but also where the complements could come. I think it's one of those that I don't know that a clergy that is the exact same as that church need to all be together, because they're all going to do the same thing and agree on it, and nobody's going to challenge them. And the few people that are going to challenge, we're going to get real frustrated with being a part of a congregation that only wants to do this piece. And so I love the possibilities of what does it look like for, whether it's, the call process or the appointment process, or however you do things, even in interviewing for staff positions, to say, we want to see where you fall on this, because we want to see where that meshes and where you'll challenges, but also we want to make sure that you have a clear understanding of what you're going to need to ask for help for, and have that expectation up front. Like, it's just so big. Like, I'm so ready to just make everybody do it, and then we can all be on the same page, and I'm ready. And if the pandemic would just settle down, I have lots of plans for it. So.
Yeah, nothing like releasing a book in the middle of a quarantine. But what I will say, one of the things that I've loved is that you can take the test online. And so some churches are starting to do this online and start having these discussions online, because they can do that ahead of time, and then be ready for whatever's going to happen. Because I can already foresee how we're going to need our disciples positioned when we're coming out of quarantine, right? And if we're able to be intentional about that and know that our Mattheans are going to be ready to feed people, right? And we're going to need that. And our Markins have already been just like burning the world down with the innovation, right? And that our Johannines are going to be ready to teach new skills and new skill development, maybe a critical thing as people are trying to adjust to new jobs, potentially new jobs, and they can mentor into those sorts of roles. And then Lucans, we're all so hungry for relationship right now. I mean, even those of us that are not terribly Lucan, miss people. And to be able to meaningfully develop those kind of connection points. If we've got folks ready and leveraged, I mean, it's going to be a game changer for folks, right? So thank you, Michelle, for sharing that perspective. I really appreciate it. And if you all have questions for Michelle, and do also invite you to, although it's going to be a little confusing, right? If you say, Michelle, I have a question. And you can't even say Michelle M. I have a question. You'll just have to say Moore or Morris. But yeah, so welcome me to share those as well. I do want to talk briefly about what it is that I think are the major points that I've learned from working with churches. So just to give you an idea of how this kind of unfolded, I had this revelation, came up with this idea for this assessment, started testing individuals, and the conference staff were some of the first that I tested, and then got a few churches to be brave and to let me test them and have some deep conversations around the test. You all, the assessment that you take online is the fourth iteration of the survey. It's been refined. We had some questions that were kind of given funky false results, so that's been cleaned up. But I was able to kind of really work closely with several churches and with their pastors and with individuals getting this ready. And here were the things that I found made a difference for individuals and made a difference for churches as well. And we'll unpack more of these over the course of the week. But the first place was that it gives the language, which Michelle, you made reference to, right? You suddenly understood, you had a way of talking about this, right? It both gives the language and speaks the language. So first of all, it gives the language of Scripture. We don't have to go anywhere else for this language. It's in our Bible. Thank God, literally, right? You will see how these characteristics are all spelled out within each of the Gospels that we look at over the next 4 weeks. And so we can speak authentically from our faith about how we understand our faith. And that's powerful. It's powerful that we don't have to do a translation. It also speaks the language of things like I've had people ask, have you looked at this up against the Myers-Briggs? People are crazy to get me to compare how gospel discipleship types match up with the Enneagram. And there's some interesting conversations going on about that. So it speaks that part of our cultural language right now, which is these kind of self-reflective tests that are out there. So it speaks that, but we don't have to adapt this test to the church context. We don't have to adapt it to our faith because it's speaking the language of the faith to begin with. And it really is giving ways for people to very quickly comprehend who they are and how they understand discipleship. I was chatting with a friend of mine today who was one of the early testers, and I asked him, what do I need to make sure people know about gospel discipleship? And he said, tell them this, that as soon as my churches took the test and we started unpacking everything, they got it immediately. It didn't take any real instruction because they're already couched in the faith. And suddenly it made sense to folks. And it doesn't matter if you've got a degree, a Master of Divinity degree, or you're a brand new baby Christian. It's very quickly, easily picked up. And that's powerful for folks. The other thing is, and this is one of the things that I love. Kirk did ask in there, it didn't show your individual type scores. It won't on the online assessment. Turns out that's a real expensive feature. So if you want to know your actual scores, take the test in the book. It's a paper test, and it will tell you how to score it, and you'll know your scores from there. But the other thing that I love about this is that it starts from who you are. So many programs that we look at in the church today start from this place of, this is the people we need you to be. So here we're going to get you to these people. I think God has a plan for who you are. I think we just need to know who that is. And so it starts from this, you are the people of God. and you have this call on your life, and this is who you are, and this is who I need you to be, to live into that identity more fully. And once you have that understanding, you can live more fully into that identity, and feel good about the disciple that you are. Like I said, it was so relieving to me to let go of the guilt of not being on a mission trip. Not to say that I know I need to go at some point to understand my Mattheans, but it was also empowering for me to be able to say, oh, you know what? My Mattheans really need to go on mission trips. Like, that's who they are. And I, as a leader, can equip them for that. That's how they live their discipleship out. And so it doesn't start from this place of, you're not the person that we need. It doesn't start from this place of, you're not the church God needs right now. It starts from the church of, you are exactly who we need. And you are exactly the church God has a call on your life. I believe if the Spirit is present in your church, which I assume is the case, then God has a purpose. And living into that is amazing. It's amazing. It's freeing. So this is not a program to make your church into something it's not. This is a program it's a resource to discover who you are and to embrace that intentionally, to claim it. Somebody said, I keep saying name it and claim it, right? Name who you are, claim that identity, live fully into it. And then once you know who you are, you can communicate that to others. And that's the key piece on getting more people to be disciples of Jesus Christ, is to be able to clearly communicate that. And so my churches that now understand, oh, we're a Lucan church. We really do love God and love neighbor. Like, that's who we are. And this is how we understand living out our discipleship. And the fact that they can claim that. And I will tell you, Lucans, I've worked with a lot of Lucan churches, because Methodists are a Lucan denomination. And again, we'll talk about this later. But one of the things about Lucans is they're very inclusive. They love all people. So they get nervous about me saying you should be Lucan, because they're like, but what about the Johannines and the Markans and the Mattheans? And I'm like, yeah, great. And they're welcome in your church. But who your church is Lucan. And I promise you, there's a Matthean church down the road. There's a Johannine church down the road. There's a Markan church down the road. God needs those churches to be Matthean and Johannine and Markan. God needs to be Lucan, because we're all trying to share this gospel with the world. And you need to be who you are. So I love that, and that's been transformative for people to get that claiming. And then the other piece, first of all, it gives you the ability to plan to be who you are. So I have watched this unfold in the course of this pandemic. I have watched people. I've predicted where their anxiety is going to come from based on their discipleship type. For instance, Mattheans hate having their hands tied right now. They see so much need, and it's so complicated to respond to that need. They're still doing it. People are still getting fed. It's very complicated. And Mattheans just feel that urgency right now, and it's hard on them. Like I said, Markans are having a blast because all these boundaries are down, and we're getting to do crazy creative stuff online. And Lucans are caught in this tension of we want to be with our people, but we also want to keep our people safe. And so how do we stand in both of those worlds? And then Johannines have been desperately looking for good, clear leadership. And this is all based around that. And I've watched how that is all unfolded. So when you have this understanding about yourself, you get to plan to be who you are. Like I said, we're going to be ready stepping into post-quarantine to fill the roles that we need to fill, to live the fullness of the witness of Jesus that the world needs. And so you get to plan to be you. But the other thing is you get to understand the others that are walking alongside you doing this. It takes so much of the heat out of the disagreements. whenever you understand that it's just a different way of understanding discipleship. And all of these ways are based in Scripture. So last I heard, there was no one gospel better than the other. I mean, everybody's got their favorite gospel, right? And a lot of times it lines up to your type. But they're all four in there. They're all canon. They're all Scripture. So one is not better than the other. And once you understand the four different ways of understanding discipleship, you can get along better together, and you can work better together. And I have watched this happen in front of my face. Next week, one of the folks that's on the panel is a Markan pastor of a Lucan church, and he's going to talk about how it's been different to have that understanding, because Markans and Lucans, all of the discipleship types work really well at points and have points where they bang heads. And he'll talk about what happened. If he doesn't talk about it, I'll bring it up. What happened when they had this understanding, how it took so much of the heat out of their arguing that they were doing. And they are now working phenomenally well together. And that's amazing to see. I do want to say that I just want to briefly, well, actually, you know what? We'll talk about that in the next couple of weeks. I was going to return a little bit to my churches, but we've got a time to talk about the churches at the end. I would like to open it up for questions. So, and Asha, you said there were some things that were in the Q&A, or what were some things that are coming up with folks?
So one of the first questions is, how do spiritual gifts fit with the discipleship types? Is there a specific correlation?
So repeat that again.
How do spiritual gifts fit with the discipleship types?
Yes,
and
okay.
Is there a specific correlation?
Good question. No. I will say that there are some things that tend to show up, like Mattheans show up as helpers a lot of times. Matthean shows up as administrators a lot of times, because because one of the things about Mattheans is they love a good plan. But really a lot of the spiritual gifts can go across discipleship types. We will talk about some models for understanding, some templates for understanding your discipleship, and I will say that Markans tend to really resonate with knowing spiritual gifts and leveraging those, and it has to do with that being inspired by the Holy Spirit. So that would be where I would say the correlation is that Markans will look to know what their spiritual gift is and to live into that in the way that they understand their discipleship. That's the main correlation. But otherwise, spiritual gifts can show up kind of all over the place. So, what else?
Okay, it sounds like an ideal situation would be to have someone from each group. What happens if you have a small church that is one type, especially if they do not have an outlet for them to express themselves?
Ooh, they've got to get an outlet. And that's one thing that will help. If you do test and you do show up strongly one type, then really lean into that. And don't apologize for that. Yes, it does help to have a broad understanding of discipleship, but like I said, when you're talking about as a church, I really encourage you to lean into your dominant understanding of discipleship, and reach the people that you can reach with that. Those four gospels have each reached people, right? So if you are predominantly a Matthean church, then be a Matthean church. And that, I can foresee somebody saying, yes, we're Mattheans, but we're also an elderly congregation. So how do we put our faith into action? Just because you're elderly, even if you're frail, doesn't mean you can't still do. And so what you have to do is frame it. It helps you to have this language to frame things in a way that's meaningful for their discipleship. So if you say, I need you to do this, pray every morning, and frame it as an action, so they then understand that they are still living out their faith in that meaningful way. Okay. But yeah, no, there is some value to what Michelle's saying in building teams that are balanced. But overall, when you're talking about a church, I want you to lean into your overall identity. And one of the things that the congregation guide does is talks about the roles that the non-dominant types play in your church, because they have very important roles. For instance, let me use a Johannine church with a Markan. Johannines center everything around a great leader, so they tend to be very pastor-centered, and that works really well for a Johannine church. The problem is that pastor gets unhealthy, then you've got a dangerous situation. Markans are really good at checking that, because Markans are driven by the Holy Spirit. They don't actually pay that much attention to this person. And so Markans will get a sense if somebody's going off the rails. So I tell Markans in a Johannine church, you're the prophets, and you've got to hold your leaders accountable. So the congregation guide steps through those kinds of dynamics of how you leverage your people, but do lean into your overall. So, all right. What else do we have?
So here's another question. How can we determine the type of the entire ministry?
Mm-hmm.
And does it matter that most members don't have internet access? And I'll let you speak to that.
Yes. So test the whole church, and no, it does not matter. The paper copies are available, and so use the paper copies in the book, and contact me directly if you want more details on that. By the time we do it's in process still, but by the time we do the webinar for the church, I'll have a Excel spreadsheet that you can use, that you can download for free, and you can plug people's results in. The thing is, I'm adapting that, because I used to just do this with paper copies, and so we had everybody's actual scores. So now we're going to do it by how many of each type that you have, which will come out the same. I've already run those numbers. But yeah, I just got to get the format together. So, yeah.
Let's see if we can.
I do see that some of you all have to go. I am grateful for you staying on here. Next week, as I remind you, we'll be talking about the Markans. If that's not your type, I still encourage you to come, because you will understand other people better that you're working with. Plus, it's just fun to sit there and listen to the other types and go, oh, I know somebody that's that type, right? You'll start running through the people in your head, and it will help you, like I said, understand how you work better together. I'm going to stay on here and keep answering questions. So for those of you that can stay, please do. But for those of you that do need to go, thank you again for your attention. I look forward to seeing you next week. And if you want to be on the panel, don't forget to go and apply, and maybe you'll be one of the ones that will choose to be on there. So, but thanks again, and blessings for all of you in your work and your ministry and all of that. And like I said, we'll stay on and keep talking questions, because I saw there were a few more in there. So I'll help you now, Asha, scan through and see what else is out there.
Okay, you go right ahead and answer the ones that you feel.
Okay. Somebody who's Markan and Matthean wants to know if there's a way to step into their type now. So that is a very Markan Matthean question, because of the 4 types, Markans and Mattheans do not like to wait around. Markans get a word from the Holy Spirit, move like that. Mattheans like to take action. So if you're Markan Matthean, you're going insane. And so I can't actually answer that question for you, except to say, find something. I mean, even if it's something that you're doing through the internet, or if you're starting to pack up food bags, or if you are sewing masks, or if you can ask if you're a lay person, or if you're a pastor, if you want to say, can I go ahead and start disinfecting the church? First of all, you're Markan, do some praying around that and get a sense. Start, throw ideas out on Facebook or ask for recommendations, but do something, because you're probably losing your mind. So yeah, definitely do that. All right, what else do we have out here? So yes, if you said it was equal Markan Lucan, then you're a 50-50 result. So yeah, that's a tie. You're a dual type, and you'll definitely get to hear some about what it's like to have a tied church on the 6th week, and that you can kind of make that translation for yourself. But it does mean that you get to lean into both typologies, which is very cool. So let's see what else we got. Lots of thank yous. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Yep. Yes, as far as the chat goes, you should be able to see when people are chatting to all panelists and attendees, but if they don't choose that option, you can't see what they're writing. So it's kind of up to them. Okay, somebody mentioned that they're Matthean and Lucan equal parts. They think they're more Matthean and their church is Lucan. That sometimes happens. And I celebrate those results and say that you are called to be a non-dominant type in a church that's got a dominant type different than yours, which means, like I mentioned, you will fulfill a very important role there, but you'll always feel a little bit like you're banging heads a bit, and that's good, because then none of us stand still in our discipleship. They're going to push you, you're going to push them. Okay. Okay. Someone asked if Markans are impatient. Yes, they are. It's that you get this sense of the Holy Spirit is called you to do something, and you don't understand why people would want to wait around and chat about that, and so yeah, you want to move. Also, Markans, and we'll talk about this next week, have what's called spiritual ADD. So our attention doesn't hold for very long. So if we don't move quickly, sometimes things fall through the taps. So, okay. So somebody's interested in how to handle quarantine. We'll talk about that next week. Yes. So somebody wants to know about people constantly saying no to people who want to do God's work at church. Very good question, Rich. Some of that is not right? Some of that is interfering. Some of it is discerned, because people are looking for meaningful ways to serve, and I am grateful always for that. Sometimes their desire is, I don't want to say misplaced, but sometimes they don't know any other way to serve than the way that they're thinking of. And folks can discern that this is maybe not the way for them to serve. Markans in particular are good at discerning that. But and sometimes it's that they want to serve in a way that they're just not in that place anymore. I had a beautiful woman who loved to sing, but had crippling asthma, and she would insist on doing a special for church, and we would put her on the schedule, and then she couldn't do it, and she felt terrible, and I felt terrible, and we had to adjust on the fly. I mean, I can adjust worship on the fly, Markan, so that's one of the things you'll learn. But it was frustrating to some other folks who had to make different plans all at once. So that's the piece, that there's some interplay in there. But yeah, sometimes it's just people being territorial, and that's not helpful. Have I found? Yeah.
Over time, can you evolve or move into another disciple type?
Yes. So glad somebody asked that, and we'll have to cover that again next week as well. Yes. Different life stages lead to different discipleship, different moments in history. I have seen an enormous number of people scoring Markan right now. that I'm like, I don't think you're really marketing. But they need to be right now, because they need the innovation. And so that gift is sort of risen up for now, but their default may be something like Lucan or Matthean or Johannine. And so that figures into account. Again, different life experiences. People who have had a catastrophic medical diagnosis a lot of times suddenly become Lucan because their focus then becomes on relationships. So yes, absolutely, you can change types.
So how does this understanding of discipleship help us to walk out our faith continually over time?
I mean, I think, well, first of all, when I share the models, the templates for making a plan for your discipleship, at the bottom it tells you to revisit it. And part of that is because you may change types, but also you don't want to get stale in your discipleship. And so I think that this understanding helps because it keeps asking us to ask the who question, right? Who are we? Who am I now? And who does God call me to be now? I will say individuals tend to change types. Churches tend not to. Dislodging the DNA of a church is practically impossible. So churches tend to stay pretty steady on their type overall, which is another reason that I say really fully lean into your type. But yeah, I think that this helps because it invites you to keep self-reflecting. And that's a journey that we should do throughout our life.
Does your type necessarily mean that you like that gospel best, and should you study that gospel more?
Sometimes it does mean that you like that gospel best. In a very informal poll, that has tended to be the case. It's not 100% the case, but it's tended to be the case. And I think studying it will help you see how that discipleship is spelled out. But I mean, I recommend you study all 4 of the Gospels, right? Whether it helps you understand yourself or it helps you understand people or the fullness of the Christian witness, I would say all of them. Somebody wanted to know the Intentional Discipleship book that I mentioned. I don't have the link for that, and maybe Jacob can share it if he can find it. It is it's going to be attached to seeallthepeople.org, which was the United Methodist Discipleship Ministries push for discipleship. So if you go to seeallthepeople.org and look into discipleship plans or discipleship systems, or search for Junius Dotson, then that should lead you where you need to go.
I actually posted the link in the
yeah.
Q&A session.
Sweet, thank you. And have I found churches that had different type of discipleship than they thought they were? Rarely, but yes, it has happened. Someone said churches do not tend to change types. Is this a contributor to Matthean people leaving a Lucan church? Sometimes, especially if they haven't felt like they've been integrated well. I mean, Lucan churches are going to be very focused around fellowship and relationship. And if a Matthean thinks these people are not doing anything and there's no outlet for that, then yes, sometimes that's the case. Somebody did say their type is their favorite gospel, but their secondary type's their least favorite gospel. That's interesting. That's very interesting. And somebody doesn't like their primary gospel less. Well, that's all right. I mean, like I said, it's not 100% across the board. So and it's good to learn these things too. Okay, well, I think that's the chat for the things tonight. I really appreciate you all hanging on and giving us some more opportunity to address these. Like I said, moving forward, we're going to talk more specifics about the types, and you'll get a deeper understanding of how that disciples lived out. I do encourage you to come regardless of your type to each one of those, because like I said, it will help you understand the disciples you're walking alongside and help you integrate them and make sure that they have a way of meaningfully expressing their discipleship, just as you have a meaningful way of expressing your discipleship. And then in the last week, we will take some time to reflect on how we all do this together as a church, and how we lean into that reality as a church and be the church that God has called us to be. So I'm really looking forward to that. I'm thankful we've had this opportunity today to just introduce gospel discipleship and give everybody a sense of what it is. I'm thankful to Michelle for sharing her perspective. I'm thankful to Asha for helping manage the chat and be the voice for the people. And I'm thankful for Jacob and his wonderful radio voice for handling the technical side of it. I am just overjoyed to have had this opportunity to study with you all, and I look forward to the weeks that we have together ahead of us. So, and invite other folks to join us. We'd love to have more people along for the ride as well.
Yes, and we're thankful to you. So let's not forget that. We're very thankful to you.
This is just a blast for me. It has been so transformative to see how this unfolds for people and how it really makes a difference in their discipleship. And so I could not be happier. And I am ecstatic for all of the rest of you and what this means for your discipleship as well. So we will see you next week.